Okay, welcome folks. I think we can get started here. So there were a couple questions in the chat. Feel free to keep asking additional questions if you would like. I don't think I have much to say in terms of like new things in the course. Nothing's changed too much on Blackboard. All that's still the same. Most of the homework is up for the semester. What I'd like to do as far as the test, a couple of people have asked me about that. I'll get specifics to you next week, but here's what I'm thinking. I am thinking we will do our test. We'll do like a trig test before the final, and I'd like to do that after we finish the trig material. And so I just posted the last due date for the trig homework of April 15th. So maybe the following week, the week of April 20th, we could do a test. And the way that's going to work is we'll meet online. I'll send you either a Google Meet, but maybe a Zoom. I might use Zoom for this. I'm still working on that, but I'll send you some sort of video chat link, and we'll all meet here. And basically, you'll set your computer up kind of like this, where like computer or whatever is looking at something like this, just so I can see like your test, and I can see your hands, and I see you're not like texting and things like that. If you have more room on your desk, then this that'd be good. So I can just basically watch you. I'll sort of proctor using the camera, and I'll get you the test by just emailing it. So once everyone's sort of like set up with their document camera, I'll email you the test. You can print it if you want, but you can just look at it on your computer and then write your answers down, and then you can scan and submit your answers, and you'll submit them on Blackboard. And if you don't have a scanner, that's fine. I found a really nice scanning app called Cam Scanner that I will be sure I make you more aware of. That's nice to use with your phone. Basically, let your phone take a nice scan. So that's what I'm thinking as far as that test, but that's still, approximately a month away. So we're sort of like scrapping test 2 in some sense, and we'll just do one more test and then the final exam. And both of those will be similar formats, but I'll get you material and things like that well ahead of time. But enough people were asking about that. I just wanted to mention it. Thoughts about the test at all? Anything I just said there? Does that seem okay? You can let me know if some day in the week of April 20th works best for you. But I would like to do sort of a live thing similar to this, where you turn your camera on or your phone or something, and I can actually sort of just see that you're not texting or using material.
I have a question, Dr. Lee, about the test.
Yep.
Is this still going to be timed, knowing how you're going to time it or what? Because
I'll write it for.
I'm pretty sure something like while we're taking the test, we might have to step away or something like that. I don't know how that's going to work. Yeah, I guess where I'm coming with that situation.
So I'd like to basically treat it as much like a class as possible. And so I'm going to write the test for like an hour 15 minutes, like a normal class period, but I never take tests away from people in general. So you can use as much time as you want. We can arrange like alternate test times if you think like you won't have enough time or something for whatever reason. And then as far as like walking away, I guess I would just ask that you go to the bathroom and do what you need to do before you come in, so that you can spend an hour on the test without leaving. There's a question about calculators. You can use a normal, non-graphing, non-trig button calculator on assessments. So part of the process of getting set up is you'll get set up on a desk wherever you're going to take the test. You'll set the camera up. You'll say, okay, I'm ready. I'll probably ask you to like show me your you'll do something like this, and you'll like show me the calculator you're going to use. And it'll be, ideally your camera will be on your test, something like this. And so, it'll be working, and your calculator will be there. And so it won't be a big deal. This is a graphing calculator. So this isn't the kind of calculator you can use. But yes, you can use a calculator. It just needs to be one without trig buttons, basically. Other thoughts, questions about the test? It's a ways off, but keep them coming if anything's on your mind.
So we take the test, complete the test. If I do it on paper, you're going to obviously scan and send back. So like, is there a time frame on how long of a wait for me to scan it and send it to you?
basically, I'm going to ask that you do that just like you'll finish the test, and then you can take your phone out if you're going to use your phone, or if you have a scanner, you can use your scanner. Like this is my printer right here. Just have the printer nearby. And you would just scan it on camera and send it to me on camera. And basically, once you turn it in, you could turn your camera off and leave. That's sort of the way I'm thinking about it. And the cam scanner app is really nice. You know, if this is my phone and I'm here taking the test, you literally just like take pictures of it. But what the app does is it'll put it all in one PDF. It makes it legible. It like brightens the colors and things like that. And so that I would prefer you use that app. So basically, you would finish. You would like do this, email me the thing, and then you say, okay, I'm all set, and then you would sign off. That's what I'm thinking about it at this point, at least. I'm open to other ideas. I'm sure, you know, this is a strange situation. That's sort of the best way I feel like we could like do a test where I could sort of be sure people aren't using notes in some way, and try to make it just like as normal as possible. That's what I'm going for. Other thoughts about that? Okay, feel free to chime in if you want later. I'm going to switch over to my document camera and start talking about the material here. I saw a couple questions about that. And so we can look at that material. So this is the first page of the notes that were for today. Today's notes were all about inverse trig functions, specifically sine, cosine, inverse cosine. Was that part of this? Let me just double check where that ended. Trying to remember if tangent was part of this video. Come on. Okay, right. So it's just inverse sine and cosine. Tangent's the one from Monday. Sorry about that. Just wanted to. So the idea, and this is related to the thing that we did with inverse functions before trig functions. That was supposed to be on our sort of test 2. Was going to be something related to inverse trig functions. Excuse me, inverse functions in general. And if you remember, and let me just sort of remind you about inverse functions. I already got something written here. For inverse functions in general. So let's talk about normal functions first of all. Like the functions we're used to seeing, you plug in an x value and it spits out a y, right? You input an x and then it outputs a y. And inverses do the opposite. They take these y values and they send them back to the x. And so when you do an inverse, and that's how you represent the inverse as a reminder, you use it looks like an exponent, but it's really just like superscript -1. And you plug in outputs and you send them back to the inputs. And so that's what we had learned about in the previous inverse section. And the reason I wanted to just bring that back up, because we're talking about inverses again, but the key thing related to these things is you need a one-to-one function in order to do an inverse. Because if you want to send a y value back to an x value, you need to know where it came from. And if you have more than one place it came from, which means it wouldn't be one-to-one, then you're not going to be able to do that. So that's why we need a one-to-one function, because we need to know where did it come from, where am I sending it back to? And so I just wanted to mention that because the first part about both of these pages, 55 is the first one, is talking about how sine and cosine, this is the sine graph, for example, is not one-to-one, right? So you can draw a horizontal line and it touches more than one place on this, which means it's not one-to-one, it fails a horizontal line test. And so what the first thing I talk about in both page 55 and 56 is in order to do an inverse of these, we need to cut out a one-to-one piece. And so the first thing we do is we just cut out the piece right between my hands right now. And that piece there is one-to-one. So when we cut that piece out and it looks like this is a one-to-one piece. And so when we're talking about the inverse, we just focus on that piece for cosine, that is. And then for sine, we cut out a slightly different piece because it's a slightly different function, and we're looking at that piece then. And so each one of those pieces is a different part of the unit circle. Like, let me just fold this page and put them both up here. right? This is the one from cosine, and this is the one from sine. And you can see that they're different parts of the unit circle. And so for cosine, which is the first page, I'm sorry, sine, the first page, we're thinking about the right-hand half of the unit circle from minus pi over 2 to pi over 2. And then for cosine, which is the second page, we're thinking about the top half of the unit circle, which is from 0 to pi. And so whenever we get an answer for these things, we're looking for the answer to be between those values, either 0 to pi for cosine or minus pi over 2 to pi over 2 for sine. That's sort of like the overarching idea, which sometimes makes these problems tricky. Let me just clarify further, like on tests and things like that, I'm a little more lenient on which piece of the graph you give me. So like if you gave me a piece that was supposed to be here, but you told me the piece that's over here instead, I usually am okay with that. I just tell you I am okay with that. That shows me you know what's going on. Maybe you just picked up the wrong piece. But for the homework is looking for answers on the correct piece. And so you really need to be careful, especially when you're doing these homework assignments. Okay, so that's sort of my general summary there. Is there something to clarify about that before I jump into a couple of the questions here? I know there's a question about page 55, the inverse. I see there was a question from Gabe as well. Maybe while people are thinking about what I just said, let me address Gabe's question. So he was wondering about homework grades. Is it possible to have those grades be tallied with what's been due? Just sort of to give you oh, I see what you're saying. So like since I posted all the homeworks, it shows them all up there and it shows that it's lower than it is. I wasn't really aware it provided a summary grade on those. Actually, what I was thinking about doing was just maybe summarizing the ones you've done so far and putting that on Blackboard. And so maybe I'll do that. Let me make a note here to do that. What I will do is I can't control what WebWork does, but I can summarize WebWork grades on Blackboard occasionally. I can't like do it every day or something, but I'll do it occasionally. At least do it today so you can have an idea of where you stand right now. I've been meaning to do that actually, so thanks for that. Okay, let me jump into some of the questions here. So we need to be talking about a specific piece. And so Cameron had asked about some of these ones on the right-hand page here. And that's what this is saying here. So these are like properties that talk about, these are the cancellation properties of the inverse function property. If you look back at the inverse notes, this is the applications of the inverse function. And but what's going on here is you can use this property as long as x is on the correct interval is the idea there. And so on the one he was specifically asking about, which is this one right here, 11 pi over 4, 11 pi over 4 is not in the correct interval. So with, again, with sine, we're thinking about the right-hand piece of the unit circle between minus pi over 2 and pi over 2. Well, 11 pi over 4 is on the left-hand half of the unit circle, and it's too big, right? And so we need to relate it back to something that's in the correct piece of the interval. And so the idea is sine is the y value. And so 11 pi over 4 has the same y value as pi over 4 does, right? They're like the same height on the unit circle. And so if they have the same y value, instead of using 11 pi over 4, we use pi over 4. And so we're just trying to like relate it to the piece of the unit circle that we actually are supposed to be dealing with, which is the right-hand half. And so instead of doing sine inverse sine of 11 pi over 4, we instead change 11 pi over 4 to pi over 4 because they have the same y value. So they have the same answer, in other words. And so we use that value instead. And then this is in the correct interval we were thinking about. This is on the right-hand half of the unit circle. And so then those two things cancel, and this pops out. Right, so these are cancellation properties, to be clear. I hope everyone's watched the video. My assumption when we do these things.
Question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So what's the answer? So the answer would be no for 11 pi over 4, but yes for pi over 4?
So the way these work is this says when you have sine or sine inverse inside of each other, they cancel, and whatever the x value is left, as long as you're in the correct interval. And so what happened here was we related 11 pi over 4 to something in the correct interval, which allowed us to cancel those two things, and then this ends up being the answer. Do you see how these properties, like the x is inside here, but then the answer, it pops out. It's the same x, right? So this x pops out and becomes the answer. And so pi over 4 is the answer to this one because those two things canceled and this popped out. What were you saying though? I think you maybe.
I'm asking in a literal sense. How do we like answer this? So in a literal sense, like writing it out, the 11 pi over 4 would not work for this problem, but pi over 4 will.
Correct. Right. So let me clarify further. On a test, I probably wouldn't ask a question like this, but if this was a test, I would accept 11 pi over 4 because if you're technically using the property, it's just not on the right interval. But in web work wants you to answer the answer on the correct interval. So pi over 4 in a literal sense is the answer. That's what you would enter into web work. This is a web work question. Is this the first page actually? Am I missing another page here? So the idea is like, if this is what sine looks like, let me just draw a sine really quick. So it usually goes from 0 to 2 pi. The part that we care about for sine inverse is from minus pi over 2 to pi over 2. So we're trying to focus in. Let me label all these things. That's pi. This would be 0. This would be minus pi. And so this would be minus pi over 2. And this would be pi over 2. And so what we've said is we want to focus in on this piece of the graph of sine. And so 11 pi over 4, if we reduce that fraction, it would be 2 and 3 pi over 4. And so it's like past 2 pi and then another 3/4 pi. Excuse me. And so it's right here. This right here, let me draw that point down here. That's 11 pi over 4. And this is the value of 11 pi over 4. And so it's outside this box. And so what we're trying to do is say, well, where is this part of the graph right here inside the box? And so we're relating it to this piece right here. And this is pi over 4. And so technically, you have, when you repeat this, the graph just keeps going forever. And so this point shows up every time you repeat the graph. And so the question is, where is that point inside the box? Because we're trying to focus on a specific one-to-one piece of sine. Thoughts or questions about that? Caroline, there's something you want to ask about page 55? Is something about a clarification?
Yeah, so on page 55 under the first column, are we basically given the y value, which, like, for example, the first one was -1, and then we need to find the t value?
Correct. So here's the important relationship. And to be clear, so far we've talked about this right-hand column. The important parts about inverse functions are the first column here. These are the kind of questions you will absolutely 100% see on tests. And so I would like to make sure that everyone's clear about this. And so it's all about this relationship right here. And so just like Caroline just said, sine, when you plug a t value into sine, you go to find it on the unit circle, and then you use the y value associated with the t. And so the inverse then sends y values back to the t's. And so just like she just said, when you have a problem that says sine inverse of -1, this is showing you a y value because it's sine, and it's saying, what is the t that will put you on the spot that makes y -1? And so the idea here is you think, where is y -1 on the unit circle? It's -1 right here at the bottom. How do I get to that point Well, I would get to that point lots of ways, right? There's all kinds of different terminal points that would put us right there. And so we kind of think about the various options. So like each one of these things puts you right there, right? So minus pi over 2 is like starting here and going down there. 3 pi over 2 would be starting here and going this way over here. 7 pi over 2 would be starting here, going all the way around, and then another 3 pi over 2. So like all these different values put you right here. And so that's like the various sort of like points on the different peaks. Like all the different values have, there's one on every peak. But we're trying to figure out the one that's on the right-hand half of the unit circle, right? And so we think about the options, but then we choose the one that's between minus pi over 2 and pi over 2. And so in this case, minus pi over 2 is the one that's on the correct interval. And so this is the answer then. So this is, you're plugging in a y value and you're sending it back to a t value, right? You want to say something else about that, Caroline, or anyone for that matter?
No, I think I'm all set with that column. Thank you.
Okay, and so just to sort of follow up with that for anyone else, when you're messing around with sine, you're dealing with the y value. But when you're messing around with cosine, you're doing x, right? So it's the same. So here's sine inverse of -1. This is a y value because it's sine. On the next page, when you're dealing with cosine, it's cosine inverse of -1. So it's the same problem, except it's cosine. And so now we're dealing with x values. And so we're thinking about where is the x value -1? Well, that happens over on the left-hand side of the unit circle, right? And so as soon as you switch over to cosine, you start switching over to x values. And so it's the same sort of thought process where you're thinking about the x's instead of the y's. And you're also thinking about a different piece of the unit circle, right? So you're thinking about the top half of the unit circle for cosine. We hadn't talked about anything with cosine. If I finish this one, maybe let me just finish this problem. But since we're thinking about the top half of the unit circle, and we want to be right over here, because this is where the x value is -1, we want to think about what puts us right there. Well, pi would put us right there, minus pi would put us right there, 3 pi, 5 pi, all those things would put us right there. We want to pick the one that's between 0 and pi, because that's the top half of the unit circle. So the one of these that's between 0 and pi is pi. And so the inverse of -1, cosine inverse, excuse me, is pi. That's because when you plug pi in, you get -1. Okay, so is there something else about this page or the other pages or the homework that people would like to discuss? This is a pretty tricky section, in my opinion. I feel like people are generally a little bit confused about this material sometimes, especially because I write a lot of words down on these, but I'm trying to make it clear where things are coming from. But I think if you're trying to look at the completed notes and figure this out without watching the video and watching me sort of work through it, like just jumping down to this and trying to read this and understand it is going to be really, really challenging. So I would really just another encouragement to actually take the class seriously and watch the videos, and so you can actually see where the stuff is coming from and watch it be built, rather than, again, just jumping in and trying to see understand what that means. That's going to be very hard. So anyway, I don't know if people are keeping up. I hope you're keeping up with the videos. If you're not, we've got a weekend coming up. Maybe you can sort of get back on it. But I'll also just sort of mention, I think you guys, if you haven't seen the email from the president, then you're not checking your email. And let me just say that you should really, really be checking your email right now, like all the time. But anyway, there's an emergency meeting this afternoon to push through a policy to allow students to take most classes pass-fail if they want to. And so be on the lookout for that, but just be aware that in most cases, you can potentially take this class pass-fail if you want. Couple caveats about that, though. If your particular program requires like a certain grade in the class, like you need to get at least a 2.0 in pre-calc, then you need to get a grade. And so you won't be able to take a pass-fail in that case. But if it's just an elective or some, general prereq or something like that you're just trying to get under your belt, you could potentially take a pass-fail. Having said that, if you're trying to take calculus or, you're going to build on this class, you don't want to sort of half-ass this and not really understand the material, because it's going to come back and bite you in the next step. So, anyway, I'm happy to talk to you more about that. Or do people have questions about that? Do people know what pass-fail means? You might want to start thinking about that. I'm sorry?
To be honest, I have no idea. Like, so if I'm passing right now, I can finish a class with a passing grade. Is that essentially this?
No. So normally when you finish a class, you get a grade, right? Something between A and F, and then that results in some sort of GPA average, somewhere between 1.0 and 4.0, right? Or a zero. If you fail the class, you get a 0. But what pass-fail means is as long as you get above a 1.1, I believe, you just pass the class, and so you don't get a grade, but you get the credits. And so it's a nice option. They're trying to give it, options for students who are not handling this very well, the sort of the transition, or maybe if professors aren't able to transition or whatever. It's a stressful time. They're trying to be flexible. And so if you wanted to take the course pass-fail, you would do the rest of the course. You would do the homework, you would do the tests and everything. And then if your final grade was above a 60, I think it's above a 60, you would just get the 3 credits, and then it doesn't impact your GPA is what that means. You don't get a grade, and so it doesn't impact your GPA at all. You just get the 3 credit, or the 4 credits in this case. But again, it needs to work with your particular major. Like if you need at least a 2.0 in pre-calculus to move on to the next step, then you need to actually get a grade. So it depends on your preference and your course. Or the other thing is, like, if you are doing well in the class and you want it to impact your GPA because you're going to get an A or whatever, you're getting a good grade, you should take it for a grade. And I think most people are in that boat, to be perfectly honest. I think no one should be thinking about not getting a grade unless you really have an issue with it for some reason. It's totally up to you, though. So are there other questions about that? Do you understand what pass-fail means now?
Yes, thank you.
Again, that's something that's going through governance this afternoon. There's some big meeting about it in about an hour. So it's not official yet, but I'm pretty sure that's going to go through. And you should be looking out for your emails for that stuff. Okay, other questions about the notes or homework? Have you guys been looking at the homework for this? And let me remind myself when this is due. So this is due next Wednesday, this trig inverse stuff. There are 3 fairly, there's 2 fairly challenging. Let me start over. There's 3 homeworks due next Wednesday. 2 of them I think are generally challenging. So I was trying to finagle it to push it to the next week, but there's already 3 due the following week too. So we're hitting some of the material that might take a little more of your time. And so I would just really encourage you to come to these sessions with questions about the homework or other things so we can make sure you're understanding it and you're getting the grades in the homework. Most of your grade is going to come from the homework now in addition to the test. So you do want to make sure you're understanding that stuff. Other things I can help with right now?
I actually have another question on page 55.
Sure.
So, I'm understanding what's going on in column 1, but do you have any tips or steps that might be helpful when doing column 2? Just because I'm kind of getting confused once it gets more into depth.
Yeah. So the first step is to think about which one of these properties is being used, right? So is the inverse inside sine or sine inside the inverse, right? And so this one, sorry, let me come on here. This one, sine is inside the inverse, so this is an application of the second one. Right? This one, the inverse is inside sine, and so this is an application of the first one. So that's the first step. It's are we using line 1 or line 2? And then these problems can be easy in some sense because the answer is just whatever is inside there. It's the x value. So in this case, the answer is going to be minus pi over 4, or the answer is going to be 5, or the answer is going to be 11 pi over 4, if that is on the correct interval. And so once you realize which row you're using, you just need to check to see if whatever's inside there is in the correct interval. If it's not, and it's the first line, like this one, then you just get a that does not exist. If it's not, and it's a second one, then you need to just relate it back to something in the correct interval. And so that's sort of the process there. So let me maybe summarize that. That would be helpful. So in the second column, wait till that focuses here. in the second column, step 1, identify which property is being used, or which property to look at. If it's property number 1, let me make sure that they're the same on both pages. Yeah, if it's the first property, that's not right. That's not what I want to say. See whether the x value is in the correct interval. If yes, then x is the answer. If no, and it's property 1, the answer is does not exist. If no, and it's property number 2, relate whatever the x value is to something in the correct interval. And that will be the answer. Oops, I'm off the page. Sorry. In the correct interval. Still off the page. There we go. And this will be, this something is the answer. So that's sort of the process you would use for those kind of problems. Does that help at all? I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. And you know, I'm recording this. I'm going to post this to YouTube right now. So if anyone wanted to come back later and look at this, you could always do that. Pause the video, hear me say it again, write it down, whatever. I'm also going to post this stuff to Blackboard using that Cam Scanner app as well. So that will be up there too. Other questions I can help with? Other things I can help with right now? Okay, so I'll just remind you, I always post this stuff. I'm around during the day for help if you have questions. We can pop back on. And I also stick around in the chat afterwards too. If people have a question they want to ask me, I don't know, privately or something, or we could jump on another chat. Okay, thanks guys. Have a good one. Have a good weekend. I'll see you on Monday.